Welcome back to the 4 a.m. report, folks. And if you've been following along with this series, you know that we're tackling the business casing of a podcast, particularly if your podcast is either something that's on the mandate from a boss, founder, previously delayed agenda, whatever it might be, or if you are trying to convince a boss about it who's not quite seeing it yet, right? So with that in mind, in the last 3 episodes, we covered off how to sort of amplify your content marketing. We covered in episode 159 how to consolidate into larger bodies of work. And then in episode 161, we covered how to deal with the issue of there are so many podcasts, why should we be making another? Or your own concerns about the podcast market is oversaturated and how do I deal with that? Today is all about ROI. And if I might be sort of whimsical for a second, we like a good soundbite around here. We like a good naming sort of trend and a way in which we can commit things to our own memory. So about, I want to say 2.5 years ago, we created a model that we sort of internally call the domino effect. So sometimes when you listen to a podcast or when you look at your own podcast ratings, not ratings, but numbers, you tend to feel a little stressed out. Like if you look at purely downloads, which I think is a highly outdated, sad old metric. Like the reason that we're still measuring podcasts in metrics has nothing to do with quality and innovation. It has to do with the fact that the podcast platforms really don't have any other metrics to give you. They can give you listens and they can give you downloads, and the listens are also flawed. So downloads is really the only absolute metric at this point, but that's a little archaic. That's a little questionable. So when you look at 20 or 50 or 200 or 500 or whatever your stage of business is, that on the downloads versus what you're getting on other platforms, it's easy to feel stressed out. So the domino effect is about, think of it like dominoes. You knock over one piece and then from there comes a series of connected things that happen. That can include things like this. It can include current clients hearing from you and sort of wanting to work with you on, different scope. It can include doc social. People don't comment at all. They don't seem to have seen what you've done. But eventually, somebody will come into your client roster and you're like, how do you hear about us? And they will tell you it's somebody who's not at all active on your social front. So that's dark social, folks. And then it can also go into recommendations and affiliates, and there's a whole domino. So listen to the clips over here about how it is that you should measure podcasting based on actual dollars in the bank and equity created as opposed to downloads and listens. Welcome to the 4 a.m. report. On this podcast, we dish about fresh-pressed, fun marketing. If you're stressed out and awake at night again, wondering what to do, you found your joy. I'm your host, Susan Diaz, podcasting founder, humor junkie, observer of human behavior patterns, and mom. Each week, I'm joined by a different co-host to break down the latest headlines at the intersection of marketing and entertainment.
How do I know the full impact my podcast has on my business and my brand? Mm-hmm. We took upon ourselves to develop something, Susan. We called it the domino model for ROI for measuring your podcast, something like that. Why don't you explain to everybody what the basic idea is behind this way of measuring the success of your podcast?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is, while I'm a complete believer that you should figure out what the ROI of your marketing efforts are, it's my pet peeve that the only real way in which people will measure a podcast is downloads or subscribes, which is really not even the start of it, especially if you're fairly new to the podcasting world. Those numbers are pretty disheartening and not accurate, because you're building a lot more than just people who subscribe and want to listen to your podcast on a weekly basis. There's so much more impact, right? And as we were talking about that, we were like, well, what does that look like? And, we like to visualize things around here. So we're like, it's kind of like a domino. You knock one over, you feel like you've done a little bit of work, and then it knocks over another little thing, whether it's by the way of referrals or people who've met you along the way, all of that. So that's what we mean by that. And we thought we'll just break that down into about like 4 factors of
yeah. So the first thing, and this is if you have guests on your podcast, which we often do, not every week, as you can tell right now, it's just Susan and I, but having guests on is great because you, of course you're going to supply that guest with material to post on their social channels to promote your podcast. So you're expanding your network. Maybe that guest introduces you to someone else that they think might be a great person to have on your podcast. So it keeps, your influence in your network keeps spreading every time you have a guest. And oftentimes this could easily lead to new business. It's led to new business opportunities for us, which led to more new business opportunities for us. So if you do have guests, that is one concrete way to measure the success of your podcast. See how big your network's expanded through it.
That's a really great point. Yeah, just the amplification that comes from a guest is worth quantifying. You might not have fixed numbers, but you will, in fact, find out along the way that that's been instrumental in many, many things. And as an extension to that, like obviously, I think there's a little bit of editorial advertising balance there. You don't want to hit on your guests and force them to in any way like hire you or hit them with sales funnels. But there is a referral aspect to it. Like from creating our podcast, for example, and we've heard this with other people, business comes in from existing clients who rediscovered you, and potentially maybe those existing clients have wider audiences than you do, and being behind or being a part of some of those projects will again help you increase your network and bring direct dollars. So that right there is sort of like you've got your guests as an amplification factor, and then you've got the possibility of referral networks that can bring you more business. What's the third?
The next was although it's hard to measure, don't discount dark social, meaning people who follow and know what you're doing, but never comment or like or share. So therefore you don't really know who they are or how many people are. But as a general rule, we usually say for every one comment you get or one like you get, 99 other people have seen it and consumed what you've put out there. Many times, again, back when we could go to in-person events, Susan or I would be somewhere and somebody would come up and say, oh, hey, I've listened to your podcast before, or I recognize you from the podcast. Again, this goes back to talking about being consistent, about promoting it, using great visuals, using snappy copy. You'll at least stand out there. Again, we didn't know who that person was. I had no idea they even knew who we were. And
sometimes that comes back in the form of business as well, right? Like on some occasions, it's not like you have a direct referral that came from a request, but when someone comes up and signs their contract, they're like, oh, do you know XYZ? Like she's the one who told me about you or whatever. So don't discount that part of it. I think that's pretty key. Also, from a personal user perspective, because we do like to look at the back end of how people behave and why they do things. Sometimes I'll see something on social. It doesn't directly relate to anything to do with my world, but that doesn't mean I don't respect that thing. I'll take screenshots of it and send it off to a friend who might need it. And you don't know who I am, but I've sort of played that little role in passing that info along. And I think that's kind of how we consume content in today's world anyway. So dark social as a whole, while it's not measurable, keep your ears open and you'll see the impact. And that brings us, I guess, to the last of the 4 ways that we think this domino expands, which is real brand equity, exposure to better talent, focusing on something like a podcast that's made like, I don't know, like 100 episodes and you've had great guests profiled on it. It certainly opened a lot of doors for us in terms of people who, like at one point, I remember, Will, you and I have talked about this, where I had to like race around like mad and try to find someone to give me a referral for a writer. Now there's people who pitch us wanting to work on the 4 a.m. report, right? And this is certainly the case for many other people who've podcasted, where they find a better quality of candidate comes in your door, thanks to that thought leadership.
Okay, there you have it. So that's a quick rundown of our ROI model for measuring ROI. Again, I'm going to plug something here, Susan. I'm going to plug a guide we wrote about a year ago. We called it did we call it how to level up your podcast? It's if you're going to start or you have a podcast and you want to take it to the next level. We talk about everything. We talk about our process, our production, and we talk about how to measure ROI with this exact model. So you can get the link below. No need to give an email or anything like that. The guide is there for you to take. So thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you for listening to the 4 a.m. report. If you like what you're hearing, we'd love if you left us a 5-star review. Thank you.